Get okay. So, good morning, friends. We are back with another episode of our talk show called The Other Side. As we get talking to Mr. Sundaresan Subramanian, who's a senior business journalist and executive editor at Economic Times, the author of The Dirty Dozen, the book which covers the journey of Big 12 NPA cases which were pushed to CRP at the behest of RBI in 2017. A lot of water has passed under the bridge ever since, and we have seen the law turning on its head more than once with amendments and tweaks to suit the context and plug the loopholes. How did he decide to cover this topic? What was his experience? What was his most interesting interaction? His take on the process and the evolution as an outsider, having interacted with stakeholders across, and an independent perspective of many aspects of IBC. What happened on the ground and what did not. So I would take this opportunity to ask him all that and more and leave some for the Q&A if feasible. We also welcome Dr. Mr Sahoo, former Chairperson IBBI, having written the preface to the book, who would also share his thoughts. And of course, we welcome Mr. Sanjeev Pandey, who's former DGM SBI, who would share the financial creator's perspective, I guess, having been exposed to almost all of these cases. So friends, let's get started. What I propose, we'll ask the very basic first generic question to the man of the hour, the author himself. And after we hear his initial thoughts, then we'll come back to Dr. Sahoo for his, for his summary and initial remarks and his interaction. So let me put the first question to Mr. Sundaresan. How did you think about writing this book, your first, and about the IBC landscape? Was there a special trigger, or did you plan it for a while? Over to you.
So, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Sanjeev, and good morning, Sahoo sir and Mr. Pandey. So, it is a great pleasure and privilege to be on this platform and talk about my first book. So, it was around 2016, when this whole news flow about bad debt and a lot of defaults being in the system started. So one of the major events was departure of Dr. Vijay Mallya in a very spectacular fashion. He had to resign from Rajya Sabha and he took a flight out of India. So that was a major event happened at that time. It was early 2016. And then what followed was, or around that time, the Punjab National Bank had put out a list of willful defaulters, and of which Mr. Mallya was also a part. But there were several other companies which were for the first time put in the public domain, and these had details of directors, the addresses, and all that. So, as a financial journalist, I was working with Business Standard at that time. So we thought, so these big cases are known. Let us go down the list and find out what is happening below, and certain smaller cases. Is there a genuine default, or these people are like fly by night kind of people who have kind of tricked the system? So one of the cases which came up was a company by name Apple Industries. So these guys had taken loan of about 400 crores from the public sector banks, and so the addresses were in Delhi. So this was in an area called Shadara, northeast of Delhi. So I went there and I tried to look at the address. So when I saw, what I saw was really shocking. So this was supposed to be a company which has taken 400 crores of loan. But what was there was a small juggi chopdi kind of a structure in a slum. And there were some 17 companies, name boards with Apple this, Apple that, and all of that was stacked one over the other in that small, what you call a two-story tenement. And it was a single room, and there was just a person who can be called a watchman who was there. There was not much in terms of an office or any records or anything. So this, for me, this was the moment where I first saw that this is an issue. This, like, even that the person there or with that kind of assets and profile, you won't even get a small personal loan or a vehicle loan. But how could the great Indian banking system lend them 400 crores, and they were on the way of writing it off? This was the question. Now, so many people have asked in the last 10, 12 years, but at that time, like, this was a moment, kind of the, so to say, the apple dropped for me to write this book. Though eventually, so a lot of things happened during that year. 2016 was a very eventful year in the Indian financial system, if you look back. So I think by the next 6 months, IBC was passed by the uh, parliament, and it became law, and Dr. Sahoo took over as the first chairman of IBBI in 2016. But the bad debt idea was developing, that it could be a book. But after IBC came, then there was immediately after, within a month, there was this demonetization announcement by the Prime Minister. So the entire banking system got involved in that for the next couple of months. So my book idea also kind of got disrupted, and so by the time we took a look back at it, the announcement of 12 companies which were to be first be pushed into IBC came up. So then we thought that I would look at this whole problem through the lens of these 12 companies. And that is how the idea of Dirty Dozen took shape, in the sense.
Okay, great. Now, I just picked up your interesting, comment about the office of the establishment of Apple Industries, which which was probably kind of a trigger for you. And it speaks a lot when we speak about the seriousness, the scale, the possibility of returning money in those scenarios, right? The eligibility, and probably if you put it all together, so probably it speaks about the intent of the promoter or the entrepreneur. But then, there's a parallel school of thought we would have seen, and I'm sure, like, Dr. Sahoo, Mr. Pandey will also, endorse to an extent. We've also had cases where, at the first go, the people had plush offices, and in terms of operation, there was nothing. So, that's the extreme, the other extreme, where, like, you probably borrow the money, God knows, I mean, somebody says, fake it till the time you make it. So yeah, these guys have really, put it into a proper faction. So I think these are two extremes, where both of these extremes probably.
So probably, I think even in Apple's case, both happened. They probably had a very plush office before taking the loan, and then
Okay.
they moved it all here. So you don't know. It is a matter of investigation, probably.
Unless until, as people say, there are different set of accounts which are made for income tax authorities and something else for somebody else. Similarly, you have two set of offices, establishments. So
Yeah.
when you want to take a loan, you invite the banker to a different address. But
Correct.
at the time of recovery, I guess the address changes. But anyway, so that's interesting. So let's come to Dr. Sahoo. Sir, आपने book पढ़ी, आपने इनसे interaction किया, you've written the preface. Now, what is your view, of course, in general about IBC, being the chairperson of IBBI, and with your interaction with the author? What exactly are your thoughts? It would be nice to have them. Bataiye. If you can, yeah. Yes, sir.
No, I think so far I was aware of three apples: Adam's apple, Newton's apple, and iPhone apple. Now Mr. Sundaresan has given the fourth apple. That changed my mind. But I must compliment Mr. Sundaresan. We all are familiar with his passionate, incisive and insightful writings for decades, and he continues his passion through this Dirty Dozen, and I congratulate him for conceiving this idea. And in a sense, since I had drawn a parallel to Dirty Dozen from somewhere else, I think he has made Dirty Dozen immortal in Indian context by this. Yes, there are problems. As the IBC, I have stated this in the preface, but before that, let me draw your attention to the yesterday's judgment from Tamil Nadu High Court. That was in the matter of some suing company, the National Suing Thread Company Limited versus the Tangedco. So this is talking about several things, but it has cited. That means what I want to say, that the courts have started noticing the writings like this book. There I found they have cited two books actually. One of Justice Nageshwar Rao and one of Mr. Ananta Merathi.
Okay.
I have seen other judgments also. So judges and courts are taking notice of these scholarly writings, and this is important that people write more on books like this. Okay, IBC comments, and people of course did not expect IBC to be a reality and to be implemented. No one took very seriously, and IBBI, in fact, Mr. Pandey was one of the initial constituents, and 5 others were there. All of them joined after 2 months or so. But there was a feeling that there was no user. IBC has come into force on 1st December 2016. Few personal creditors and few corporators themselves who thought who can take advantage of this were filing the applications. In fact, the case which I referred to yesterday's case from Madras High Court refers to a situation like this, that the promoter is actually taking advantage. That is an MSME. He continues as a resolution applicant. There is one financial creditor only. So practically a deal between the financial creditor and the promoter, and the operational creditors, their dues were completely wiped out. That is the Tangedco.
Yeah.
And over that, the successful resolution applicant, that means the person himself, the original promoter himself, is now asking Tangedco that because of this provision, I have got a clean slate theory. So all your past dues are gone. Now you are obliged to provide me connection. So there the Tamil Nadu High Court has come down very heavily actually, and getting into the conduct of creditors, IP creditors, and then denying that clean slate theory. So there was a time in early 16, some promoters wanted to take advantage like this, that they will come, go away with a clean slate, nothing would happen to them, except that some creditors will lose. In the yesterday's case, it is the operational creditors are losing. But some creditors will lose, nothing would happen. So there are a few who came up like that. But the creditors, the big guys who have given thousands and lakhs of crores of money, they were not forthcoming for reasons best known to them. One, you can give a benign view that they were not familiar with the process, but probably the reasons are much deeper.
Right.
And since they were not coming forward, government, and when they were not coming forward, simultaneously there was a demand that IBC can't take up, let us have PARA, a public sector bad bank, which of course happened after 5-7 years. So people who were in economic survey of that year from Government of India also advocated that IBC not work, let's go for PARA. But unfortunately, though that was view of one section of people, but the people who matter probably were not convinced. They thought big or small does not matter, and let the policy begin from home. So let us bring out an ordinance which empowers central government to direct RBI, to direct a banker to file a case in case of a default. That is how the ordinance came. RBI was empowered. RBI came out with the first list of 12 cases, and which went through all of them went through rounds and rounds of court visiting court, and so many times some matters are going to Supreme Court, but settle the law. There are some minor modifications, some press release to be minorly modified, all those things. Ultimately, RBI did this 12, then they came out with another list of 40, but then they moved slightly different path. That why should we direct identify these 12, these 40? Why not we have a circular which allows people to go as per principles? And
Right.
that circular in the course of time was challenged because the law had empowered RBI to give direction in case of a default. So RBI could not have given a general direction, therefore that circular was struck down. But these 12 became most contentious, have a great history, good or bad, and it is great that someone and person like a Sundaresan Subramanian has brought in the history and their trajectory and how they have traveled through the insolvency process. And now we can reasonably be assured that this Dati Dodson has laid the foundation of IBC. Thank you.
Right, sir. Thank you. So this was a deep insight into how it all got started. And before we come back to you, Mr. Sundaresa, Mr. Pandey, maybe a couple of minutes from you, because you having represented earlier IBBI in the very beginning, around the time when the Dirty Dozen actually got started, and then you moved back to SBI, your alma mater, and then you've been spearheading the entire process from SBI, the largest public sector bank. So I'm sure, in all likelihood, you must have had exposure to all these 12 big cases, and different stories must have come to you. So what's your insight, and to the extent you've been made aware of the books and what we heard Dr. Sahoo talking. So let's have your comments on this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. So basically, I see this book is excellent compilation of the history of this NPA pile-up. And I think, of course, Mr. Sundaresh did not have access to many of the resolution plans. So he may not have those kind of insight, which actually we saw the plans and all. Right. We sat into the COC meeting. So we had a slightly different take on some of the things. Most of the issues captured by Mr. Sundaresh are quite on the mark. I'll only say I think the entire blame doesn't lie on the banks. That is my contention here, because this was a kind of a systemic failure. The accumulation of NPA to the tune of 10 lakh crore in the banking system. So you cannot just put the blame entirely on the banks. First of all, we all know that maximum NPA generated out of public sector banks. One basic reason was that in infrastructure, power, steel, the sectors where a lot of funding is required and they are capital intensive. So not many private banks ventured into that kind of risk. So it was left to the public sector banks to support government policies, especially in infra, power, to set up these huge power plants and huge these road projects, huge steel plants. So this was the need of the hour. So I think the government prompted the banks to go in that direction. And somewhere down the line, I see one failure was on the part of the government. On one side, they pushed banks towards funding this large project. At the same time, they did not provide them the comfort or support required from the government to make these projects complete, first of all, because every project in infrastructure, biggest risk is the construction risk or completion risk. There lies the problem, like in power projects, coal mines were allotted. We gave the sanction the project, half of the plant was constructed. Suddenly the coal mines were rejected by the Supreme Court. Yeah. Everybody knows the history, but there was some blame lies with the government. Why did corruption happen? All that led to ultimate finally risk landing on the table of a banker who lost money funding to these projects. Similarly, road projects, if you see, during the Vajpayee government, a lot of focus, a lot of input was placed. NHA was created, Ministry of Surface Transport, a lot of emphasis was given. But suddenly when the new government came, this emphasis was lost and emphasis went some other way. So all these projects, they lost their way. In between, Land Acquisition Act came and most of these projects were just abandoned because there was a big difficulty in acquiring the land. So I see there again, banker was not to blame. They lent the money on the basis of a concessionaire agreement. That concession agreement was also created by a government bureaucrat. I know the name, Mr. Haldia. So he even had a patent on that concessionaire agreement. That agreement basically was designed in a manner where entire risk was placed on the concessionaire. Government will not take any risk. Whether government doesn't give him permission on time, doesn't give him land on time, but no risk of the government, no risk to bureaucrat. Only risk, entire risk lies on the concessionaire who has taken. And this gentleman went to the bank for a borrowing. Bank were naive because they did not have too much experience in this area, new areas of road construction in the private sector, or maybe bridges or power plants. So they were they took the promoter on his word, or maybe trusted him that he will complete. And they didn't know the policy paralysis will happen and suddenly the things will change. Actually, risk, you can only assess the risk at the opening of the project, or even at the appraisal of the project. But suddenly some new risk come in the manner of some Supreme Court judgment, or some change in regulation, or something like Land Acquisition Act. How can a banker who is appraising a project in 2004, 5, 6 could have foreseen these kind of risks, or the global financial crisis? So I think a lot of blame also lies with others. And then third point of failure was with the regulator, which is RBI. They did not have a clue that how much money these big dirty dozen have borrowed from the banks. Till Mr. Ram Rajan created a software structure, actually RBI did not have a clue how much borrowing Bhushan Steel has done from the market. Only separate banks were advising separately, but only in 2015, when RBI created a special cell which started monitoring all these top 50, 100, 200 groups, which were the largest groups, they got to know, oh, Bhushan Steel is having exposure of 56,000 crore. SR Steel is another 54,000 crore. So that was the failure of the system, the regulator. How did he allow such a big exposure to a particular party? Because, and then another failure, which I think Mr. Sundesh has mentioned somewhere in the book, was multiple banking. My personal view is that it was the biggest hit on banking, or the financial discipline by a corporate, when somewhere in 2006, 5 or 6, RBI came out with this provision that you don't need to have a consortium discipline. So they just opened the banking for everyone. And actually, I know this was done based on the pressure brought in by some private banks, because they were not able to penetrate some large consortia. So just RBI opened the field without providing adequate support at how these bank consortium leader will control this borrower. That opened the floodgates for lending. So corporate loans, loans without security. I think Mr. Sundesh has captured somewhere the unsecured loans. It was I think the trend of the day after 2006. This corporate loan kind of a structure came in, where there was no security. Just on a piece of letter, private banks, and then after that, public sector banks also got into the game. They were lending just left, right, and center. So I think it is then. Lastly, he also blame lies on the professionals, the chartered accountants, the company secretaries, and the valuers. They were not regulated at all, or regulated in a very cozy environment where nobody touches the other guy. So they were signing the balance sheet, knowing very well that this money is being diverted overseas. So whatever Mr. Sundesh has tried to capture, that the banks didn't know how the equity came, how the money was diverted. It was actually the fault of the auditor, who only saw through the transactions while auditing a company, but they never mentioned that in any balance sheet. Ultimately, a banker only goes by whatever is available. It's an audited balance sheet by a statutory auditor. When he's not writing anything, how can you, and a normal banker who is not a chartered accountant, who is not even an accountant or accounts expert, how can he make out how money is being diverted? Now, all those things, all those gaps have been tied up, I think, through ED taking action under PMLA. Then there is a economic intelligence group which is advising banks before lending. This party, whatever dubious transaction they are doing, there is a government body which is monitoring all these transactions. Now RBI also monitoring what is going out of the country, what is coming in, how the money is going out. So all these things are somewhere monitored, which should have been the requirement at that time. it should have been done at the right time, because all these systems failed. Now you have a master regulator on the auditors like NAFRA.
No.
Now they are fearful of signing anything. But it was not the same 8 years back or 10 years back. So I think a lot of these factors also contributed to this big pile up of bad debt. So that is my take.
Got it. Right, sir. Thank you. So, so friends, we've heard the regulator, we've heard the banker, and yes, we hear some messages to getting the credit on a simple piece of paper, or like that typical famous phone banking era at a point in time. But I think if you put it all together, we are saying that everyone has been a contributory to the failure in a way. So let's not pin one of the stakeholders to take the entire blame of the baggage. And so it's a kind of systemic failure, as you said. So let's move back to the author and figure out how dirty is the dirty dozen, right? Now, okay. So my next question would be, with your experience in writing the book and of course interacting with various stakeholders, how would you rate this legislation, which has been a landmark, a earth-shattering, one of its kind in 2016, coming along with GST, demonetization, so many things, where so much of action eventually we saw, where Supreme Court also had to make a remark that the promoter's paradise is lost. Now, if you put it all in perspective, I mean, how would you rate this? What exactly have been your experience when you figured out that, yes, people have been struggling or grappling with this draconian, if I may say so, legislation? So your views on this?
So I would like to recall the famous quote of Gordon Gekko in the film Wall Street. He says, I am not a destroyer of companies, I am a liberator of them. So when he talks to those shareholders of Telda. So I think IBC is kind of, though the aspect of promoters being penalized and removed, the threat of that and that impact on the banking system is highlighted a lot. It also kind of helped the corporate debtor to become a going concern again and create economic value, to protect whatever the economic value is left in that entity. So to that extent, if you see like companies like Bhushan Steel and some of the others which have been now put back into the system are performing even better than some of the stronger companies which are in those industries. So this is found out by a recent study by IMA Ahmedabad. So if you look back, IBC is one of the biggest reforms in the financial sector done by this Modi government, both in terms of impact and the amount of recoveries that have happened. About, I think, total 3 lakh crore worth of recoveries have happened for the banking system in the last 7 years cumulatively. So, and if you compare with some of the other steps taken by the government, for example, demonetization, which has which is arguably one of the steps which did not bear fruit, and some of the others like Mr. Pandey mentioned, NFRA, and now the bad bank has also come. So those are still in the early stages, you would say. Like NFRA took like 3-4 years to prove their constitutional validity. It is only now they are able to pass orders on those past sins of auditors, so to say, like in ILFS and other big cases. So those have been slightly slow, and whereas IBC has hit the ground running and delivered a lot of value to the system, so to say.
Okay, interesting. So in a way, if I were to say, you're saying 8 years, too young still, or old enough? Because, the school of thought can be that now, after 70, 75 years of, the independence, now we've come out with many legislations. We've had the good, bad, ugly part of it, and probably, it can be planned better, it can be drafted better, it can be enforced better, and you can preempt what can go wrong, what can't, all those things. So maybe 8 years is good enough time for something to stabilize. That's one school of thought. Other is, it's such a complicated law where you're subsumed, I think, 17 other laws over the period, and jurisprudence has to evolve. At the end, principle of natural justice, everything has to be seen, a bit of discretion, in spite of you making it as objective as a typical debt and default and within 14 days pass in order, which has seldom happened. Now, so with that, probably there's a follow-up question. Could few things have been different? The reason why I say so, as an outsider, if you see, do you see that it being, assuming a draconian view where it can lead to a death of a non-natural person, right? If I may say so. Now, a softer approach. Now, it's a school of thought, right? Again, we are saying a softer approach, a softer launch could probably have been a better idea rather than getting started with a big boys club, which they represented, 12 of those cases, they represented about 25% of the NPA. Now, because it necessitated many tweaks and very soon, within the first year itself, which means now there are again two school of thoughts that having come out with such a legislation, which was, a big legislation, earth-shattering, a landmark one, that within the very first year onwards, there were requirements of the tweaks and amendments to continue to make it effective, plug the loopholes. And then people say, yes, the government was agile enough with their ears on the ground that the moment they figured out that there is a problem or a system can be gamed, or there are some tweaks which are, important to quickly put it back on the track, if at all, versus a scenario where they could have started a bit slow, figured out, but then the impact would not have been on those big 12 companies. So these are two school of thoughts that maybe a hasty job and then necessitated the tweaks, or they were agile enough. So, I mean, that was the best way they could have done. Because this, after I hear you, definitely, would like to have, Dr. Sahoo's as well as Mr. Pandey's view. But after you, please go ahead.
Sure. I think it's a hypothetical question.
Yes.
What would have been, like, we can always ponder about what would have been. But I would like to refer to Dr. Sahoo's remark earlier, how even after a few months of introduction of IBC, the banking system was dragging its feet. They had so much of bad loans. They were supposed to take action, but they wanted some kind of push and they wanted some kind of direction. Probably nobody in the system was able to take a call, and the people who understood it were not in a position to take a call. So then this push had to come from RBI, and in a way, in hindsight, what has happened is good, because that brought in a lot of focus of the entire attention from the different stakeholders because of the high stakes involved. And the IBC ecosystem also could stand up and develop with its RPs and the entire NCLT framework. All could come up to speed because the stakes were high. Otherwise, if you're one small company here and there, like a lot of shortcomings of the law also would not have been exposed in that manner for it to be fixed very early. For example, be it the homeowners case in JP, or the related party issue which came up in the SR case, and later on when the resolution applicant could not pay up in case of Amtech Auto. So these are peculiar cases, and the entire system grappled with it, and it went through the whole NCLT, NCLAT, and the Supreme Court, and the jurisprudence was set up early. Despite that, there have been several shortcomings, especially in the adjudication infrastructure, whereas all other was centralized to some extent with RBI and IBBI holding fort on the bank side and on the regulatory side. NCLT was scattered all over geographically, and there were different, because of its quasi-judicial nature, they were not speaking in one voice in that sense, because the same issue would be decided in different ways in different benches, and that created a lot of confusion. Initially, there were also heavy shortage of people in the NCLT system. There was fewer benches and fewer people manning them. So the entire USP of IBC was that timely resolution within a certain deadline. So that itself, we had a situation where cases had to wait for longer than the entire deadline to be admitted itself. So which also made the problem worse in many cases. So these are the issues were there, but I don't think if we had taken a softer approach, we would have been able to get even at the point we are now. So
Okay.
a lot of time would have been
Sure.
lost. This is my personal view. Of
True,
course,
true. No, so I understand.
Sahoo and Pandey.
Sure, sure. So I totally understand that this, in hindsight, of course, it continues to be a hypothetical question. What if? That's what the question is. But still, to have a quick view from Dr. Sahoo also, sir, agility versus a hasty job. I mean, how would you put that? How would you take it?
No, I fully endorse what Sundar told.
Yeah.
I have heard this thing in 16, 17, 18 that when you do not have the insolvency professionals who are competent to handle Bhushan or SR, etc., such complicated cases,
Yeah.
you should not have started implementing IBC. What they were essentially saying is that people will be parachuted from somewhere, complete, extreme, great, complicated specialists who can take the charge of this. And that means they were saying that never implement IBC. So, but we did not follow that approach, and they also fought through court many times. In many ways, they tried to stall the implementation of IBC. It didn't work. Yes, IBC could have been implemented much better. But even with all that, what we have today is that today we have NPA less than 1%. Last financial year, 3.2 lakh crore of banking profit.
Yeah.
If IBC were implemented in true spirit, probably outcome would have been much better. But even without that, I used to say that the best use of IBC is not using it at all.
Great, sir.
Prime Minister in the 90th year function of RBI on 1st April, he told that, okay, this much money has been realized, but he told that, आपको ताज्जुब होगा एक आंकड़ा में बताऊंगा. Then he went on to say that 27,000 applications have been filed but withdrawn before admission, resulting in outstanding debt of 10 lakh crore. So if it would have gone through the process,
Yeah.
we do not know what would have an outcome. But even without going through the process, we have got the outcome.
Right.
Yes, there are so many cracks coming up actually in the IBC. In the sense, in the initial days, people did not know how to go around the IBC. The first resolution plan we did when we did not have any capacity got approved in 180 days time. Now we have all capacity takes 1800 days time. So that means we have now figured out how to create problems, how to create delays, how to abuse the law to our advantage. I was referring to the two books cited in yesterday's judgment. One is of Justice Nageshwar Rao. There in the preface, V. Rama Subramanian writes that, she writes that there is abuse from everybody, from debtor, from creditor, from resolution professional, from everywhere it has come because everybody has found out a way to abuse it. And unless you address those abuse, probably she concludes, IBC itself needs a resolution plan. So you have to rescue IBC if you do not act promptly. The problem is that I think somewhere Sundar, I think mentioned, Sundar Sanjeev mentioned about the fly-by-night kind of operators.
Yeah.
This word was used in the context of a securities market in early 90s. That was when we have tested the first round of freedom. Economic reforms happened, people are given freedom to raise money from market without requiring any approval, and there was some abuse. Some people raised the money and they disappeared overnight. That was known as a fly-by-night operators. This happened from 92 to 95. It happened precisely because SEBI did not have any jurisdiction over the issuers of companies, issuers of securities. In 95 amendment, SEBI was given jurisdiction over companies only in matters of issue of capital. And thereafter, we do not have a single instance of fly-by-night operator. So today the problem is the market participants, debtor and creditor, they are the market players. We have professionals who get a professional fee, who have to serve them. Unless, and this is a game, unless you bring all market players within a regulatory framework and force them to follow the rules of the game, people will take this system for a ride. And it is high time actually, it's not that IBC was, there was some loophole in the IBC or deficiency in the IBC. But people, since the very first amendment was that 29A, that came because people found a way to abuse it. That does not happen in foreign countries. So therefore, this provision is not there. But here, somebody abused it, we have to bring something to seal that abuse. So most of our amendments, except relating to COVID times, are actually addressing the abuses. So therefore, I think time has come to give complete authority to whosoever you want, that all market players must be subject to regulatory discipline. And of course, there has to be also the quality of supervision or oversight over IPs and other professionals, valuers, and anybody who is assisting. That has to improve. I'm not meaning that the disciplinary actions. I'm saying the quality of oversight that has to improve. Okay, this is all.
Right, sir. So you rightly mentioned the lender-borrower relationship definitely has undergone a change. And I think it's very clear that the threat of IBC is much bigger than the IBC process itself. So that definitely is, well taken. So what I'll do is, looking at the paucity of time, I'll quickly pack 2-3, important, interesting questions. And then, we'll come back to, the other guests. So let me go back to the author. So few interesting experiences, if you can quote, because, you would have met stakeholders who were connected to each of these dirty dozen cases, right? Which means insolvency professionals, apart from, of course, regulator, potentially some banks, some other people who were part of, the entire ecosystem. So can you just briefly tell us, because it will be interesting for people to know that when you interacted with them, what was something different which came out of the discussions? Because, we being inside the system, we always had a limited, view, or depending on how we saw it from our own classes. So it'll be nice to have, couple of interesting experiences, maybe another 5 minutes on that. Yeah.
See, so I have met a few public sector bankers who explained to me like Ms. Pandey also mentioned earlier, how there was a whole various economic factors which also contributed to these big 12. Like if you look at those 12 companies, 5 of them are from the steel sector, which had its own cyclical issues.
Yeah.
And 70% of the whole outstanding was probably from the steel sector. And if you look at the resolution, these companies, because they had put in a proper asset, the steel plant was up there and working, despite all whatever diversions might have happened and coal linkages could have been disrupted. So the buyers saw value and almost 50 to, in case of SR Steel, I think 80% was the recovery. That was the highest. So to credit to the system, so this proves that all was not bad in the appraisal process. There were cyclical factors which were involved. So many bankers were of the view that they couldn't do much, but just some insight into the working was that one of the things I found was that lopsided relationship the borrower and the banker, public sector, typical public sector banker had, because these guys would come on these flashy cars and they will throw around their weight. And one of the cases where which was seen by everybody, which was visible to everybody, was Malaya and his big parties, which Raghuram Rajan, the RBI governor at that time, had to publicly rebuke in that sense. Like when your companies are in trouble, you are putting up a show here. So when I met one of the bankers, so this was what he was telling to me. There was a guy who had a 300, 400 kind of crore kind of outstanding, and he issued an open threat in a meeting of bankers. When he said that, so if I go to jail, I'm prepared for that. I have save money to ensure that I am taken care of well. If you guys go in, then you will not survive a single day. So this was the attitude which was prevalent before this whole IBC thing came, and in fact, even before IBC became law, like I think our RBI put up this SDR and try to create an IBC kind of environment so that the promoter at least gets a kind of a threat or feels a fear of losing his company. So these were the instances which bankers had to face, and many times they had to feel powerless in front of the way things were functioning at that time. So other thing is that this whole after I have written the book, I have received a lot of love and affection, and everybody has supported me. So even within regulatory circles, when I met with the book, so what they said was that the a record of what all has happened was found missing in kind of the chronological way this has been accounted for in the book. So to that extent, this is a book of record even for them. That is what they said. So this book is now being used in some of the RBI training, some refresher courses. So these are the couple of things which I thought I found it interesting.
That's really interesting because
Other remark is that people say that you should do something like dirtier dozens, because we know the dirty dozens. There are a lot of other big areas, big companies which have gone into, and some of the groups we have hinted in the book also, which later on came into that.
So after the initial 12 cases, then of course they came out with a B list, which was I think 6, right?
Yeah, that was the February 12 circular, which got later modified, and
yes, right. So as they say, I mean, for a smaller loan issue, you are after the bank, but if it's a bigger loan, then the bank is after you, because that's where it goes with the statement what you referred.
I think now the mainstream movies have also been made. If you see that famous Shah Rukh Khan movie, Pathan, I think it starts with the bad loan issue.
Oh yeah.
Pathan or Jawan, I think, not Jawan. So there is big borrower versus small borrower kind of.
Right. So a topic which now connects a lot of chords elsewhere as well, so that even the producers thought it valid to take
So
it
it is
forward.
in the public, it has caught the fancy of the
Yeah.
common public also. So
That's true.
now bankers, every entire system has to be mindful of that whenever they go ahead. So
True. So fair enough. So I
I'll
got
comment.
yeah. Sorry,
Yeah,
please.
just come in here. Yeah,
Good.
one thing I would like to mention here, which is a great service Mr. Sundaresh has done. See, there is no system of maintaining a history of corporates in banks, basically.
correct.
That is a basic missing factor. Like a person who is today analyst, right? Analyst in a bank, say State Bank or any other bank. So he only is able to see the history for 3 or 4 years backward, because in his file only those papers are available.
Correct.
He is never able to see 10 years back what this promoter or this company was doing.
Correct.
So, and that I have highlighted that in my bank, but somehow nobody likes that idea. But that is very important. Unless you maintain a 10-15 year history of a
Yeah.
company, your analyst will never know what is the tendency of this promoter. Tomorrow he will keep on lending, keep on enhancing his limit. Tomorrow where he will land, you can make out only through history. That is part
the
one.
institutional memory has to be developed.
Yeah, has to be developed. So you have done a great service by creating this history through a book, at least for these particular accounts. Second thing I would like to add here is, see, there was another feature which I think nobody may have been missed. India had a system of financial institutions. We are all aware, like IBBI.
Development financial.
Yeah.
Yes. So what their advantage was in funding this project, especially for long-term funding, because their source of funds was long-term. So basically, they used to borrow funds through bonds, 10-year bonds, 15-year bonds, and offer a handsome rate of return. So they had a asset liability matching. So their liabilities were 15 years, so their assets, loans are also 15-20 years. So you do not have that mismatch. Any banks functions on asset liability mismatch. Today, what's happening is all these banks have been converted into universal banks. So today you have a situation, I can talk for my bank like State Bank. Our average deposit duration is around 2 to 3 years today. Nobody wants to keep a fixed deposit for 10 years, right? So we have a liability of maximum 2 to 3 years. On the other hand, when a steel project or a infrastructure projects, some power project comes to me, even the construction period itself is 5 years, 4 years.
Okay.
Then it starts there you have to have a gestation, because these projects require some time to stabilize. So you need at least 8 to 9 years to stabilize. Then you start recovery, repayment. That should be the timeline. But what has happened because of this mismatch, bankers were not agreeable to lend anything beyond 7 years.
7 years.
So now if a steel plant requires a loan of 15 years, suddenly the bankers say, no chance. We cannot give you, because our RBI will kill us. We will have a big asset liability mismatch. So what we can do, you try to squeeze this project to 7 years.
Correct.
Now you see, as a finance person, I can tell you, okay, if the project is going to be viable only after 10 years or 8 years, how can you squeeze it to 7 years? How can you start repayment after 6 years? That led to so many problems. So many of these projects, especially in steel infra, they were stuck because of this. Suddenly, during the construction period itself, the repayment started.
Correct. So that interest cost they were not able to cover.
Yeah. Then some people, what they did, they started manipulating by extending the COD date, the completion date, and all that. RBI came out heavily on that. They stopped that practice also. So the restructuring, or what they call in that evergreening, actually Mr. Rajan said that word, evergreening. That was the requirement of the day because of two things. One is that your DRTs and the codes were dysfunctional. So bank could never recover the kind of money in this larger project without taking the total recovery to almost 2 to 3%. If you take SR, you could have taken SR to court in 2014, right? DRT was there, SAPESI was there. What could have been recovered? Only maybe out of 42,000, 54,000 crore, maybe 2,000 crore, 3,000. That was the potential recovery there. Actually, I remember some of my friends told me that even in some of the COs, the consortium meetings of SR, banks actually offered him to settle for 50%. It was before IBC. That gentleman said, no, nothing doing. You take 25, 30%, and otherwise it's your problem, not my problem. So actually it was a problem of the bank. They were stuck in a place where they cannot take the loan to DRT. because that will take 20 years to
Correct.
close.
It was not an
You go
efficient
to-
system.
Yeah, you're going to take to SARFAESI, because SARFAESI you need assets, you need real assets to enforce. What will you enforce? Who will come to buy your steel plant and an auction notice? Nobody will come. You cannot run the plant under SARFAESI. So all these problems, that they thought best way is to keep on kicking the can down the road. So just maintain this account as a standard account. And the promoter got this weakness, the sense of this weakness of bankers. So they started dictating terms. Okay, boss, if you want your account to be standard, you give me more money, I'll pay your installment, pay your interest, and that way we can continue. So this
There
way,
were some 17 times this account was restructured. That's what.
yes, exactly. So that is something. Only after IBC banks got the confidence to really take them to court. Again, I remember Mr. Sahoo one day telling me, Pandey, why your banks are not very enthusiastic about IBC? We are here 3 months. We have created the IPs, we have created the law, everything. And first application was filed on by ICICI Bank on, I think, 17th or 19th January. That
Correct. That
Yes,
innovative.
SBI was nowhere in this. So then he directed, so you go and talk to RBI. So me and my WTM, Mrs. Saxena, so we went to a delegation to RBI.
Okay.
There we had a presence of some 20-30 senior bankers, EDs and DMDs and MDs of banks, and RBI deputy governor was sitting there. So we gave a presentation on IBs. That was sometime in February 17, I think. We gave a half-an-hour presentation. Even Biharam Vakil was there. He also explained some of the queries. Still, it took banks another 3-4 months when the RBI came out with this 12 dozen list, 30 dozen list in June 6th circular. So actually, the hesitation was because banks thought that if we take them to the IBC, suddenly we have to provide. And these were huge loans. Like SR Steel, the SBI exposure itself was around 10,000 crore. Wow. If you suddenly, and that was a time 15, 16, 17, when the banks were already having a huge burden of NPS. So their provisioning was already very high. They're not really getting too many profits. So now you suddenly have to make a provision of 2,000 crore on single account. So banks' balance sheet will go for haywire. And still, even today, I can say the incentive with the bankers are not towards the resolution. I am saying this on a public platform. Even today, a banker who is going for a promotion or due for promotion, he will only get good marks in his confidential report if his all accounts are standard, if his good recoveries are good. All these things lead you to what? NPA management and recovery. And IBC is not for any of this. IPC says no NPA management, you take him to the court.
So there is no incentive to.
Yeah, so even today, incentive is towards recovery. So most of these loans which are going to liquidation, the banker think, yeah, why should I go for resolution? The plan itself will take 3 years to approve. At least in liquidation, I'll get something in 2 years. Let me go for liquidation.
It's a very big statement you're making. And in fact, I mean, that's where, that's where the reality is. Because the IBC does speak about a resolution, but at the day, every financial creditor, operational creditor, a home buyer, a lottee, everyone's priority is to get what was due to him. What is
because his CR will get numbers only if he gets a recovery.
Right.
A foreign recovery comes faster from liquidation than resolution. Because resolution plan is like just tottering in the court for 2 years, 3 years altogether.
And that's exactly where the other issue is that the COC, which essentially, we have a lot is riding on the COC's commercial wisdom, but we all need to accept COC is a very heterogeneous body. I mean, so much so that today a home buyer as an LOT is also part of the COC, apart from HNI, apart from FD holder, debenture holder, a corporate guarantor. I mean, so the list is huge. So banker's perspective definitely has to be a lot. I mean, for example, in JP, what we have seen, right? Bankers were there. I mean, they initiated. But because of the, 21,000 home buyers, the things went from, back and forth so many times that Supreme Court apparently had to use Article 142 to have the CRP start again. I mean, that's again, history created in a way. But, right. So now, also paucity of time, we thought 60 minutes would be good enough. But I just have 2 more, questions. One, I got on my message box separately, which I'll link with something which in any case I had to ask. So I'll try and combine both of them. So it says IBC seems to be only for the dirty dozen. You know, the way the law was brought in, the way the bank's balance sheet had to be treated, the way they were looking at 25% of the NPA market to be, handled, managed, whichever way we say. So it seems, the kind of amendments, tweaks, which were immediately brought in because it had to be handled. It was a big task which had to be handled through our legislation. So it seems it was for the dirty dozen. And after they have been put on track, okay, some of them, nearing completion, or some of them already done with, it seems the job is over. The kind of that enthusiasm, the euphoria seems to have died down. Now, linked to that, I would want to ask you, does IBC needs an overhaul, a new version or a carve out to continue to be relevant, effective? So these both things go hand in hand. Was it meant for a particular a section of industry or the accounts? And after that, the euphoria seems to have, died down. So, views from all three, I guess. But just a quick one so that, we can wrap up quickly. So we start from you, Mr. Sundaresan.
So quite to the contrary, this last year, there have been 275 resolutions which have been passed. This is a record.
Yeah.
So that only 12 companies, it was for 12 companies. I think it is not a correct assessment, I would say. And this also proves that, and even the adjudication infrastructure has been ramped up. It is now like better than before, though it is not as much as one would like to, because they also have Companies Act responsibilities and a lot of other cases which land up there. Now even class action suits have started coming up in the system. So NCLT has increasingly lot of responsibilities. So that to that extent, it still may not be optimal. The number of resolutions coming out might be still less than the cases. Though this year apparently the number of admissions are lesser than the number of resolutions. So faster resolutions are happening. And I think if something is working, why tinker with it? So if it's not broken, why fix it? So that is my short answer for your other question.
Answer well taken, sir. So,
Yeah.
Dr. Sahoo. Dr. Sahoo, आपसे आपका view.
I think the euphoria was represented by three things. One was that something new is happening. Everybody was on a learning curve. Now we think we have learned almost, some marginal learning is happening. So initial days was a learning phase. Initial days was also a phase of settling the law. So matters going to Supreme Court, you wait for the decision, then you discuss those things. But most important thing was that, why the euphoria was there was that, as we saw this big dozen and another big 40, and those cases gave good amount of professional fees to professionals. Now you do not have that big cases where the fee, let's say we know that professionals used to take a chartered flight to go to Ahmedabad to appear before the NCLT. Because stakes were very high, professionals were making huge money. Now they don't make as much money. That is, in that sense, euphoria is less. The trigger, and now that NPA, it was done for those 12 cases or NPA cases, that was the trigger, not 12 cases as such, but the twin balance sheet problem was the trigger, something urgent was necessary. But the trigger and the purpose are different. We came in response to a trigger, but the purpose is much bigger actually. Bigger is that it is an economic reforms. It is not a recovery law or solving the NPA problem. It is not even, it is of course the resolution of the things, resolution of stress, but bigger is the liberation. Liberation of the resources, including entrepreneurs stuck up in dormant, defunct, dead businesses. So The resolution has happened 800 companies, probably 7,000 has gone for liquidation, and then another 3,000 or 2,000 those are done in voluntary liquidation.
Yeah.
And in this liquidation actually is actually the freedom of exit. And why it is important is not because, again, we have not implemented the entire law. You will have a much bigger euphoria once you start implementing the individual insolvency, where you have proprietorship and partnership firms, which are a breeding ground for entrepreneurship. Then only the real concept of liberation arises. In big companies, really you do not have entrepreneurs. These are the managers mostly. But entrepreneurs are residing in 6 crore MSMEs and non-incorporated companies.
Right.
And for them, mortality rate is high. People are stuck up for life. So if you get into there, it will be a much bigger euphoria, much bigger revolution. And in fact, the whole purpose of this law is the liberation. Resources are limited. Physical, natural, human, all that you can say. They must work with utmost efficiency for all 365 days of the year, 24/7. And that this law enables. So we have actually not scratched the surface of the law. Much bigger euphoria is awaiting. Thank you.
Right, sir. Thank you. So, if with your permission, I'll actually, as a professional who's also spent 8 years in this ecosystem, I'll say, as Mr. Sundaresan said, admissions are less, right? I mean, recently we have seen admissions are like much lesser. So, I wish professionals don't have a role, but where the credit is reserved is where the resolutions are happening. So, if there are more resolutions, there is a contribution of a resolution professional who's seen the process, who's driven the process. So from that perspective, yes, your point is valid with regards to, whether it's the fee or that initial big cases. Now there are a lot of, smaller cases are also there. But let's wait for the part 3 to actually get, notified. I'm sure there's a lot of action which still, is around the corner. So couple of minutes from Mr. Pandey on, on this last question, and then we'll, want to wrap up with a one small, a kind of, what should I say, voting. But that'll be later. But a couple of minutes for you, sir.
So I agree with Mr. Sahoo and Sundaresan. This law was not created for dirty dozen or large corporates only, but ultimately because of the high cost of resolution and the time involved and all, it became more suitable for larger corporates rather than SMEs or smaller corporates. And actually, Section 29 was fit for the large corporates. It was, although brought in for everybody initially. Yeah. I remember I was heading the NCLT division, and then we got a communication from the government, MCA, that what are your comments, DFS actually, what are your comments on this Section 29? So we, I think, wrote very strongly to government, sir, this is okay for SR Steel and Bhushan Steel. You can keep out the promoters. But what will happen to small SMEs? There is no buyers there. So this was very, very strong letter I drafted, and my MD also said, Pandey, you're writing a very strong English to the government. They may not like it. Sir, actually, this should go very strongly. Otherwise, they will kill the MSMEs. So actually, that was the words we used. Okay, this section will kill your MSMEs because there will be no buyers there. Other than promoter, nobody will be interested in this. And then I think good sense prevailed that Section 240A came later on. Yeah, which removed the MSMEs from that. So law is for everybody. Only thing, still people have not realized the time factor of this law. Like the bankers, still they are taking a lot of time in taking the company to the court. So that delays a lot of value. A lot of loss is created there. Then in admission there are delays. Then resolution there are delays. So this is actually leading to a lot of loss of value, which is, I think, pushing people away from IBC towards compromise. Yeah. As Dr. Sahoo said, a lot of resolutions are happening outside the court, outside because of the fear of IBC. So I would also say that IBC is more successful out of the court, but we should focus on making it successful in the court also.
True.
So we,
So,
yeah.
Great. So you mean again, like, is the threat of IBC is bigger than IBC as a process itself? So yes, well taken. So one small question and slightly tricky one. I mean, it's more of a guesswork for all three of you. Now, JP had been a part of the Dirty Dozen, right? And just about a week, 10 days back, we had NCLAT approving and dismissing other appeals and approving the payment to the farmer. So kind of all settled. So Raksha as a resolution applicant, successful resolution applicant is taken over. But almost about 7 years, twice the CRP, which had to go through. So simple question, 3 days back, Jayaprakash Associates got admitted, right? So Jill, 7 years, and Jal, your guess, sir. Mr. Sundaresan, just put a number. I mean, of course, I understand. I mean, nobody's going to hold you for that. But it's just like...
No, I don't know. Like, I don't think this would be as complicated as its offspring, because they doesn't have this home buyer angle and...
Not so many of them. Not so many of them, but
not
it
so
has
many.
cement, it has hotels, it has so much other thing. It's a conglomerate. So I think there'll be different set of complications, not only the home buyers part, but yes, the home buyers for sure.
Also, I think there was an combination transaction wherein the land belonging to Infratech was pledged on behalf of Jayaprakash Associates. So that was kind of ordered to be pulled back. I think RP played a role there, and he had now around, I think it was around 5,000 acres or some huge land. Forgetting the exact amount.
No, apart from there, this was 750 crore transaction also, which was like, amount sent, and then eventually it came back and they were not allowed to use
that. I want to mention this, like in this context, because there is a huge amount of avoidance and fraudulent transactions being found out by the RPs in during the course of these several resolutions.
Right.
So, as per the latest publication from IBBI, there have been around 1,11,000 crore of fraudulent transactions which have been reported by the RPs.
Right.
This is also one of an important finding of this IBC mechanism, but I don't know how many of them would be resolved, because only a fraction of this, around 2,000, 3,000 crore, have been
absolutely. So
brought back.
2.5%. Absolutely. That continues to be.
So this is another important angle which is not talked about much, because the focus has always been on resolution and getting back. So what will happen to this and apart from that fraudulent transaction which RP has already termed as fraudulent, there are also other undervalued transactions. There are combination transactions which takes the amount involved to over 3 lakh crore, which is almost same as the amount realized in all these years from all these realizations from resolved companies. Around 1,000 companies have total realization is around 3.35 lakh crore, but almost a similar amount is in these kind of transactions which have been found by RPs. So this also has to be taken to the logical conclusion, and people responsible have to be fixed and face the music.
So your is definitely a bone of contention in many resolution plans also, in terms of when would they receive and eventually who would it accrue to. There was a lot of back and forth in terms of which kind of creditors does it, like is everyone is eligible to get a pie of that, share of the pie or something. But yes, that continues. So any number in terms of how many years people will have to wait for Jal. Just a ballpark. Look, again, the point is it's more in a lighter.
Yeah, I just hope it finishes within the statutory timeline. So
of 180 days.
Hope.
I think that's okay. Okay, let's see. Mr. Pandey, any number you want to throw? Now it's again like just in a lighter vein, because things have evolved ever since. When JP started, things were different.
Yeah, I am slightly positive by looking at this go ahead transaction.
Right.
You see, go ahead transaction, the admission and the process has gone very fast.
Yeah.
Although we did not reach a resolution, but actually the court have functioned. So I think courts are also conscious of the public sentiment here. So especially in last transaction, they are not delaying now. That is my sense. They are taking prompt action. And since this company, that is one of the features of IBC, which I have noticed that most of the resolutions have happened wherever the asset was good, underlying asset was good, you got a good resolution and good recovery. So I think since JP Associate has some good underlying assets,
Yes.
so I think the resolution will come and come fast.
So nobody's given a number. I mean, the point is fast and good and better. So let's hope. Dr. Sahoo, you want to throw a number? It's just like, again, nobody's going to catch us by this because the process will have to be adhered to in any case.
Okay, before coming to that, the number of admissions is less, is attributed to show that probably the euphoria has gone. Actually, that is not the measure. Measure is, but we know admissions are waiting to happen for years.
Yeah.
So you have to see what is the inflow of applications for which we don't have the data, we don't release the data. And possibly that data is subsumed in that 27,000 which was withdrawn to some extent. So if you do not admit, then you can't say that admissions are less. So my guess is, instead of focusing on admission, the NCLT is focusing more on the resolution of plans, so that the ones which have matured, let's harvest it, rather than starting the fresh things. So the impression is that the number has not gone down. Second, actually it is good if the number is less. That means if less people come to hospital, the better. So we should welcome that. One problem is happening, some people are not coming to hospital because they know the consequences of going to hospital can be very bad at times. Here the problem is, a resolution applicant, after submitting a resolution plan, is waiting for 3 years for a plan to be approved. And when it is approved, he finds that this plan is no more viable. He committed money 3 years ago. Now he is forced to take this company up to whatever commitment he made. This is discouraging people to submit a resolution plan. Therefore, the possibility of a company getting a result is becoming less. Therefore, creditors are taking a call. Is it worth traveling through that route, or only use that as a threat but work out solution outside? So this is what it explains about the numbers. For IBC, small, big, asset, no asset, it makes no difference actually. It all depends on the set of people who are playing that game. The resolution of professional, committee of creditors, cooperation of debtors, and NCLT is an orchestra. If there is a perfect coordination among them, the process becomes faster. If not, they keep on raising the issues repeatedly, going to Supreme Court repeatedly, they take time. So we do not know what way JP will take, but we should be guided by the past experience. Today, the average time, again, irrespective of, because small company is not taking less time, I have observed. So today, the average time is 800 days. I would expect that we also take 800 days plus minus 100 days or so. I don't see that any great miracle happening to make it faster, or somebody deliberately creating problem to delay it. So we go by the average time.
Got it. So 800 days is definitely, a welcome number, frankly, for the creators of Jayaprakash. So it's so great. So friends, I think we have overshot our time. The discussion really became, interesting, and we went, covering various aspects. So let me kind of, come to a closure. Thank the author once again for the dirty dozen. Maybe, suggestion for your next book has to be the beautiful dozen. So please do some groundwork and figure out, what are those good, beautiful dozen companies what you can cover, and tell about good practices as to how they should not be even talking or thinking about IBC relevance at all. So that's one. And maybe Mr. Pandey, a suggestion for you, IBC from a lens of a banker. I think there's a lot which has to come out as a banker from your experience, that you've been the unsaid pillar. The COC is the unsaid fifth pillar of IBC. 4 have been identified, but apparently the entire IBC has moved, on the basis of the commercial wisdom of COC. So from that perspective, I think it's that book definitely has to come out with your views. And so let me thank all of you. Dr. Sahoo, thank you, sir. Mr. Pandey, thank you. And of course, Mr. Sundaresan, as the author of, the beautiful book, The Dirty Dozen. We look forward to having another such session or another such book. And thank you, participants. I hope we had a good session. So thanks once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. This is very
Thank you.